Horror is constantly evolving. The genre has spawned so many subgenres that it's hard to keep track of them all. Fans come from all walks of life and often for different reasons. Some people want to see the most hardcore torture porn possible. Others are looking for some cheesy special effects and ridiculous plot points. And of course, there are also the monster lovers. And where would horror be without monsters? Representing all sorts of different human fears, monsters are the bread and butter of the freakiest film category. Often a certain type of monster will become popular and influence the next few years of filmmaking. These prototypical beasts sometimes end up being what we might call game changers. Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 scary monster horror movies that changed all the rules. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more titular terrors. Wicked, let's do it. Coming in at number 5, we've got Night of the Living Dead. The concept of people come back from the dead to wreak havoc wasn't exactly a novel idea when George A. Romero released this flick in 1968. However, he did bring the idea of the now famous zombie to the mainstream. Or I suppose they call them ghouls in the movie, but the influence is undeniable. This independent horror flick revolutionized the flesh-hungry corpse as well as the idea of the low-budget horror. Shot on a budget of just over $100,000, it made over $12 million domestically and over $18 million internationally. To say it was a success would be an understatement. While it was criticized for being excessive upon release, it has aged like a fine wine and is now considered a classic pretty much across the board. Prior to Night of the Living Dead, most American horror was done with rubber masks and cardboard cutouts, often set in far-flung locations. Romero and company took horror and brought it back home, effectively showcasing how scaries could be when they're set in familiar locations. It's not just zombie flicks that owe a lot to this movie. Other famous horror flicks also drew inspiration from this approach. Slashers with heavy Americana influence definitely found a lot of inspiration in Night of the Living Dead. Of course, Romero would follow this movie up with plenty of sequels, and in doing so carved out a space in the film landscape that was uniquely his. He would make 5 more of the Dead flicks during his career, many of which would be remade somewhere down the road. It really is hard to imagine the horror landscape without Romero's classic Living Dead monsters shambling about. Coming in at number 4, we've got Jaws. Be honest, as soon as I mentioned the title of the flick, the theme song started playing in your head, eh? No need to lie, we're all big movie dorks here. Jaws was massively influential when it was released and caused waves that managed to break free from the movie industry. See, I could talk about how many shark movies got made after the massive success of Jaws, and I could also talk about how it changed how people viewed blockbusters. I could talk about the conventions it created and the incredible camera work that's still referenced in classrooms today. Or I could talk about how it effectively scared an entire generation out of swimming for many years. Ask anyone who saw Jaws in theaters how they felt about taking a quick dip after leaving their popcorn-covered seats. Oceans? Out of the question. Lakes? Not taking any chances. Bathtubs? I'll shower instead. The shark, or Bruce as some might call him, managed to cause deep psychological damage to people across the world. In fact, sharks were demonized following the release of Jaws. By portraying Bruce as a vengeful creature, it started a trend of fishermen heading out to hunt down trophy sharks. Everyone figured that all sharks were as mean and nasty as the one portrayed in the movie, so nobody felt bad about taking down so many aquatic creatures for really no reason. The supposedly man-killing sharks were hunted en masse and nobody said boo. Well, until way later when folks realized the error of their ways, but by then it was too late. It's hard to conjure up the image of a movie causing a similar fervor these days, although if somebody made a particularly convincing post on social media, I could see another crazy creature hunt picking up traction. Coming in at number 3, we've got Nightmare on Elm Street. Of the 3 big slasher villains from the 80s, who has the most personality? Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, or Freddy Krueger? There's an obvious answer. You could argue the merits of each individual franchise until the cows come home, but when it comes to self-awareness, clever one-liners, and crazy powers, Mr. Krueger reigns supreme. In creating such a ubiquitous, recognizable villain, Wes Craven started a revolution. The smash hit that was Nightmare on Elm Street spawned a multi-million-dollar franchise, complete with multiple sequels, reboots, comic books, video games, and a TV show. Hell, there was even the crossover movie of Friday the 13th. Beyond the simple marketability of such an icon, Nightmare impacted the creation of other movies for quite a while. Having a villain as self-aware as Freddy allowed the movie to play with audience expectations. Crossing the border between dreams and reality, there's a whole lot of fourth wall breaking going on here. In doing so, this allowed for Freddy to become a star in the real world too. By referencing audiences and onlookers, he made it so Freddy could step into other roles, making his way into music videos and onto the covers of magazines. The expressionless, masked faces of Myers and Voorhees couldn't dream of such publicity. Even though he is a ruthless child killer, Freddy managed to capture the hearts and minds of many a movie buff through dry wit and crude humor. And the crazy, dreamlike kills probably helped too. Coming in at number 2, we've got Jason and the Argonauts. Really, any Harryhausen movie could make this list. However, to this day, it's hard to pick a more impressive stop-motion feat than the skeleton sword fight. What an impressive feat of stop-motion splicing, right? Apparently, it took over 4 months just to put together this scene. Worth every second, though. Ray Harryhausen breathed life into every single one of his creatures, undoubtedly inspiring all sorts of artists who witness his creations. At the time, plenty of monsters would just be played by people in rubber suits or in horrifying makeup. Introducing stop-motion creatures into live-action footage was a creative and innovative move, to say the least. Jason and the Argonauts wasn't the first movie to do this, but you'd be hard-pressed to find one that's more well-remembered for doing so. Harryhausen movies were often played at B movie houses when released, but Jason and the Argonauts made its way into the A houses. In fact, Harryhausen himself considers it to be his best work, and other people seem to think so too. Tom Hanks, when presenting him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, claimed that Jason and the Argonauts was the best film of all times, and I mean, it is hard to come up with an argument against that, all things considered. And finally, at number 1, we've got Godzilla. When you think of movie monsters, where does your brain immediately go? If you're not thinking about Godzilla, you're probably thinking about a monster inspired by Godzilla. Or King Kong, but I digress. It's rare to make a monster movie these days without drawing comparisons to the King of Monsters. The Toho-produced classics shift the movie landscape forever. Like most lasting masterpieces, it was not well received by its original target audience. Japanese reviewers sewered it when it first hit theaters, saying it was too absurd to be any good. But once it made it to America, the reviews were glowing. Over time, respect for Godzilla rose in Japan, earning plenty of accolades from all sorts of critics. Of course, Godzilla is much more than just a movie. It's an entire multimedia franchise that cannot be stopped. 33 films, video games, books, toys, spin-offs, rip-offs, tributes, and more. The Godzilla legacy is as big a juggernaut as the original giant creature walking up from the sea. Filmmakers and creatives from around the world cite Godzilla as a major influence in the work they do, from Spielberg claiming it influenced Jurassic Park to an entire subset of the Japanese film industry owing their unique style to Godzilla. If you want to talk about changing all the rules, look no further than the looming green lizard firing lasers and walking through buildings. Right on. Looking back at all these game changers makes me wonder what the next big thing in horror is gonna be. A24 seems to be making a bid to push cerebral art house horror to the forefront, and Blumhouse is still betting on a horror universe by way of the Conjuring series. Only time will tell, I suppose. So what did you think of the list? What movie monster changed how you saw the genre? Will traditional monsters make a comeback in the next little while? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more festering ones from the top 5 weirdest horror movies of all time, part 9. Ravon Emler says, I don't know, Keegan, the Schrodinger frog with a gun was a pretty good selling point if you ask me. Schrodinger's frog. I like it. Unplugged Gaming says, modern horrors feel like watching art pieces where the creator kind of says, oh, you didn't get it? You mustn't be smart enough. Nightmare on Elm Street was pretty self-explanatory, and that was a good horror. When too many people don't get it, maybe it was just a failed attempt to tell a story. Weird isn't always good when it's weird for the sake of weird. I mean, there's always been movies that are too weird for a general audience, and there's always gonna be horror movies with super straightforward stories. I'm gonna remain staunchly in support of weirdness for weirdness's sake. Buzzsaw GR81 says, I love Tokyo Gore Police. It took me a while, but I was eventually able to get a copy of the special edition. It's always a thrill when you find a collector's item, especially when it's one that you actually care about. David Bosnight says, why have I never heard of any of these movies with the exception of The Love Witch? The Gruesome Twosome was the nickname I gave to a pair of raccoons that vacationed in my trash bin. I thought Lords of Salem was a bit out there. Hey, there's no shame in being unfamiliar with a bunch of niche movies. If anything, it's a blast to check them out for the first time. Shane Osbun says, wow, an interesting theory. Alright, I suppose I should pack my stuff and buy a tweed suit. Academia, here I come. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I join the Razorblade Ultimate Frisbee League, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more life-altering lunatics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.